very intriguing that she that the other vampires were like, Stack and Mary, they were like, no, what are you doing, right? It was very intriguing. It was significant. Like, why did they want her transition to be successful as opposed to any of the other characters, let alone Sammy, right? So, well, Sammy was Remic's dog in the fight, but as far as Stack and Mary, they wanted her transition to come across. And now, but then again, Annie, the Juju woman, she's romantically involved with Smoke. You know what I mean? So what dog did Stack and Mary have in the fight to keep her alive through the transition? Right? I didn't catch that. Maybe somebody else could break that down for me. Haint was the origination of the word haunted. Haunt is actually the verb, whereas haint is the noun. So a haint is haunted. A haint can be haunted, whereas it's in the South they call them haints, whereas they're referring to a restless spirit. In the very, very deep South, i.e. Mississippi, Louisiana, and places like that, they're very keen on spirits and spiritual warfare. This is why in the quote unquote black church, spiritual warfare is such a big and heavy topic. You know what I mean? Because a lot of these African rituals and African folk tales and folk knowledge was passed down and packaged within Southern Christianity too. You know what I mean? Namely the Gullah Geechees, and so on and so forth. Remick possibly was about 1,500 years old. He dug up the history. So towards the end of the movie, he talked about where when Sammy started saying the Our Father prayer, and Remick was like, "Oh, those are the same words that the man who stole my father's land forced upon us." And, as much as he hated those people, those words still comforted him. That was very deep. And he talked about, the lies and the propaganda, the religious lies and the religious propaganda. And then, and then that made you question, like, okay, is he really evil or is he a victim? You know what I mean? Like, there's a possibility that he could have been alive for about 1,500 years as a vampire. You know what I mean? The Philly were, they were the enchanters of their culture in Ireland. And when when they were basically colonized pretty much by Christianity, that culture, that Philly culture, was kind of pushed to the background. You know what I mean? And faded away almost. And then there's a tale of, the angry Philly who pretty much wanted blood. Mr. Jet Movies breaks that down. He deep dive into all of that. he wasn't necessarily a vampire, but he wanted blood. You know what I mean? And so I guess the whole concept of a vampire from Ireland would spin off, right? So this is kind of where they're juxtaposing Remic's character to. He does a lot of lying and luring, and he kind of sows seeds of confusion, and he plays on your insecurities a lot. You know what I'm saying? He lies for sympathy. At first he comes to the house. Now, mind you, I'll get to that too. He walks up to the house, and then the wife opens the door with the shotgun. You know what I'm saying? And he's begging and pleading. Help. And then he's telling her that hey, they killed my wife and kid, right? Am I a coward? Or like, so he's pulling on her heartstrings. Then the husband comes. He's like, like, what the hell? You know what I mean? And then he sees the Klan robe sitting on the couch, and he's like, oh, y'all want money. So what he understands is that a lot of the racism in that era and in that culture in that part of America was fueled by poverty. You know what I'm saying? Poverty and greed. And also it was a ploy for politicians to get votes. You know what I mean? Us and them, right? There's an us and them kind of thing. Come vote for me. So he well understood their motivations. He understood people's insecurities and their motivations and their desires and yearnings. You know what I mean? And he plays on it. So at first he plays on the wife and said, "Oh, they killed my wife and kids." Then he sees the Klan robe. He said, "Oh, y'all want some money? I know y'all poor. I know y'all want this, right?" You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, none of it really matters to him. He's 1,500 years old. He doesn't need the money, right? He's 1,500 years old. He doesn't have a wife and kid, right? None of it really matters to him. He's just playing. Once again, he's just playing on them. He's just playing on them and luring them in so that he can sink his teeth into them, quote unquote. You see what I'm saying? So now I chat GPT the 3 crows circling the house. I chat GPT'd that. And what it signified and symbolized, what it mentioned that it symbolizes was judgment, judgment, transformation, or spiritual confrontation. You know what I mean? That was what it was signifying. Because if you notice, every major scene in the movie occurred at some sort of home or some sort of building or structure or enclosure or quarters. So like in the very beginning, there was Sammy's father's church, right? There was the church. There was Annie's Juju shack. And then of course the juke joint, the train station. Right, with Delta Slim and Stack and Sammy and Mary as well as Pearline, right? Then there was a juke joint. The only time where people congregated where there was no home was around Remick, and I don't want to spoil. I'd like to not spoil that. You know what I'm saying? But they congregated around Remick and there was no actual physical structure there. So what could that have symbolized, right? But that was the only time where people congregated and joined joined each other in revelry, right? Mary being stopped at the door. It was odd to me that this was supposed to be a film about black people in the Jim Crow South, right? So then why is a white passing woman being segregated against, right? like what's happening? Like, he stops her at the door, you know what I'm saying, because he assumed that she was a white woman. You know what I mean? So but in the times that they lived in, he had to be very vigilant when it came to race. You know what I mean? Which is sad. And like I said, the people who missed it would think that this movie is about racism. You know what I'm saying? The people who really missed the point, they really missed what this movie was about, would think that it's about racism.